So it's now my pleasure to get the program started here, and it's a real pleasure for me to introduce my friend Carmen Purdy. And I don't have anything written down. I've worked with Carmen so long that I don't really need to write anything down. But I talked to somebody on Thursday. I don't know if he made it to this event. He wasn't going to come, and then he, after talking about it, he decided he might come. But I asked him if he knew who Carmen Purdy was, and he'd heard of him, but he didn't really know who he was. So lots of you know who Carmen is, but for anybody who doesn't really know who Carmen is, he's going to talk himself about his experience of hunting and with wildlife in the Kootenays. It's a lifelong experience. But what I want to say about Carmen is that he puts his family first and his church, but then it's wildlife. And it's land for wildlife, it's habitat, it's building populations, it's feeding them if you have to. He's put wildlife first his whole life. And this Kootenay Wildlife Heritage Fund, the organization that is sponsoring and organizing this event, that's why I'm up here, I'm on his board, along with a whole bunch of other folks here today. Kootenay Wildlife Heritage Fund was organized, by Carmen and FJ and a few others, but Carmen has kept this thing going for decades. And I don't know if you're aware of this. The Kootenay Wildlife Heritage Fund has raised millions of dollars to acquire private land for wildlife habitat, like Cherry Creek and the Hoodoos, and been involved with the acquisition of really important ranch land over in the Elk Valley, along with the BC Nature Trust, and both Carmen and I are on the board. Carmen's a life member of the BC Nature Trust. He spends all of his waking hours, if he's not hunting, he's doing something for wildlife. I think all of us really owe him a big thank you for all the years that he has worked on our behalf for wildlife. And this event today was his brainchild, and he did all the work. He doesn't know how to delegate. I phoned him at 8 o'clock yesterday morning because I thought, well, I'll give him a day, at least I've helped him up to this point a bit, but I should give him a day and run around with him. And he's already gone. His wife had no idea where he was, and I chased around all day looking for him. And so did a whole bunch of other people. He's not a great delegator. He just goes ahead and does stuff and gets it done, and that's what he's done with this event today. So without any further from me, please welcome Carmen Purdy, the president of the Kootenay Wildlife Heritage Fund.
I see Donald Trump when he comes on the stage, he's always clapping for himself. I've never done this on my own. Never have, and I welcome you here. I sincerely welcome you here today. My granddaughter said to my daughter, I want you to put the dog shock collar on Dad or Grandpa tonight, or today. And when he gets out of line, you just give him one, right? But giving me one, sometimes there's a reaction, and I don't mind electric shock if I need it. I want to say that I have a lot of help here today, and I want to introduce to you guys like Dave White and Jill White. If there's anybody who deserves a medal, an Order of Canada or an Order of British Columbia, it would be Dave and Jill White. They've worked on wildlife at Canal Flats since I've known him, and I've known him since 1967-68. They were the ones who fed that sheep herd there, looked after that sheep herd. We got them free with benzazole of lungworm, and we were able to transplant almost too many out of their day. But I want my directors to stand up. Bob Meseraka can't make it, had a hip replacement, a double one, but he's not here today. Paul Templin. Paul is awesome. He lives down on the Elk River. Bill Workington, we all know Bill, he's quiet, but he knows his onions. Ivor Larson, former BC Wildlife Federation president, and so is Dave White. Rod Guimau, Rod's here as well today. Alan Gordon, he's here. Dan Flynn, I don't think Dan's here, maybe he is, but if he is here, stand up. Mel Billfeld, and of course Bill Bennett. My secretary-treasurer is Denise Ludet, and our secretary-treasurer is Denise Ludet. I'm not going to go into all of my experiences here in the Kootenays. And you all know the history. I'm not going to tell you all my favorite hunting stories. That'd be totally boring. I didn't get an elk last fall. That was really boring. But I passed on 3. But I know where we're at in terms of where we were. And I want you to know that my heart's sad, because I'll go on and tell you a little bit of a history about the Heritage Fund. In the spring of 1979, we had a meeting with the ministers of the Crown. There was 22 of them. We were on the rubber chicken circuit. They wanted to get reelected, and they came. And so there were 5 of us. It was Dave Moak Malinka, and I think Dave's here. I've seen him coming through, and he's still here. Ron Skyber, God bless him, he's gone. Barney Caulfield, and the same there, he's passed. Mario Rocca, he's a rock in the Elk Valley area. He's done more for the community and for wildlife than just about anybody there, but there's lots that I could mention in the Elk Valley that have done the same. I was there, and as the president of the East Kootenay Wildlife Association and the director of the BC Wildlife Federation, and I went on to be the president. I was a second vice president at that time, but I jumped over the first vice and became president because of the convincing of Don Charlton. Thanks, Don. That was the hardest job I've ever had. We met with the ministers. They were late by about an hour and a half, 2 hours, because they were on the rubber chicken circuit in the Elk Valley who wanted to do another mine. And the rubber chicken circuit, you know what that is. When politicians stand up, you throw rubber chickens at them. And so they were there and they were late. And when they pulled in, we had 20 minutes with them. The premier of the day was Bill Bennett Jr., no relation to Bill, and others that were of stature. At the same day, I have to mention this, Ray DeMarshy and the late Joe Hall were on the radio talking about like a duck stamp on our licenses that would mean that we would be similar to Ducks Unlimited for the federal stamp, and it came out of Pennsylvania, as I remember. And Ray was behind us doing something with these politicians, and that was we were going to ask them if they would tax coal at 10 cents per cubic meter, and we would tax timber at 10 cents per cubic meter, and coal at 10 cents per ton. Tom Waterman stood up and said, absolutely not, no more taxes, industry's taxed hard enough and we're not doing this. I got the same response from the Minister of Mines, but it was the Minister of Agriculture from the Kelowna area that stood up and said, I think this is a worthwhile cause. So 20 minutes isn't going to do this, so I asked them if they were hungry, and they were. Ordered up a bunch of, I think it was clubhouse sandwiches and a couple of cases of cold beer, and we had about 2.5 hours with them. The bottom line was Hewitt was really emphatic that we have a habitat conservation fund, because I asked them after they refused the 10 cents and the 10 cents, would you tax us? Would you put a tax on our hunting license? $3. And it's our money. And it's for the critters that pay their way. It's not for three-toed skinks, big-eared bats, and cordelade salamanders. It's for elk and moose and deer and grizzly bears. And it's for management of those species, and the money would be going into those species and for habitat acquisition, habitat enhancement, feeding, all the things that we need. And Hewitt was behind it 100%, said we could do it. The other ministers were saying we can't do it because there's no method in government. He said we do a horn tax on cattle, and Faye Street's here, she knows what that's all about. The horn tax, it'd be similar. So next spring, following spring, we got a visit from Rafe Mayer, who was the minister of the day, and he took Ray and I out. We talked about Premier Ridge, I remember, Ray, and said if I was a premier of this province, I would do something with that ridge and make it specific for bighorn sheep. There were some there then, and elk and deer, and we'd open it up, we'd manage it in a way that we would continually have that winter range. We had whitetail coming out of, you guys are all familiar with it, I don't have to tell you, but it was a very, very important winter range. And so if you start at the border and go north to Golden and north of that even, and all of these little peninsulas that jut out of the mountains, because the migration happens east to west here, not north and south like some people want you to believe, we had opportunity to do the best stuff. It was an interesting time. In that spring, they formed the Habitat Conservation Fund hired a local boy, Rod Silver, and they hired Dr. McTaggart Cowan to run it, and I was a director for a year or two. They never let me back on the board after that, but anyway, I was a director for a year or two. But I've always supported it. The correspondence began in major way how we were going to do this, and by then, it was winter of 1980. We had 40 inches. We already had the government convinced that they were going to do it. The stamp was coming out. It was $3 per hunting license. 180,000 hunters in the province at that time. 350,000 fishermen at that time. So we were getting it, and the guide outfitters didn't change much. They're pretty much, the territories are pretty much the same. And the trappers come and go, but they're an important part of this whole role. So it wasn't for just big game species, and I'm not using wildlife, because wildlife to the government these days means everything from tree-toed skinks to big-eared bats, and I have no problem with that. But naturalists should be paying for that on their hunting license. They don't have one, of course. By the fall of 1980, Stephen Rogers became the minister because Rafe Mayer had some medical problems and had to resign as a minister. We had 42 inches of snow on the winter range at Skookumchuck. 42 inches, I measured it. We had 400 or 500 elk on the Point V Bar Ranch that was subsequently sold out from under us. I still don't know how that happened, but it did. And I went to the minister then, and I said, I want to start a feeding program. I had already been feeding for like 20 years at the pulp mill. Not 20, about 15 by then. And we had a farm there, the Ellis Farm, and the Bradfords hated it. They kept 50%. I took 50%, and we fed elk there at the pulp mill every year. Well, I was there till 1993, and fed every year I was there. So it began to snow heavier. Had the CBC, Moira Farrell, had Moak get a helicopter, went and had a look at what was going on. It was like the winter we had in 96, 97. And so I asked for $10,000, and they turned me down. So I phoned Stephen Rogers, and I said, the first elk that dies is going to my truck, and I'm going to dump it on the speaker's desk in Victoria. And it made front page of the Vancouver Sun, of course. And Moira Farrell said, are you serious? I said, I'm totally serious. I never make threats. They're always promises, so they're getting a dead elk. It started to rain. It was interesting because all the skiers were so happy because the ski hill in Kimberley was so rich with snow. It started to rain about December 15th, and it rained till February 15th. I'm not kidding you. Melted all the snow right across the whole board, ski hill included. And maybe not everybody here remembers that. I was at the pulp mill as the manager of industrial relations at the time, and those who were traveling from Cranbrook, which was about half our crew, had to go through the St. Mary's Reserve to get to work because the roads were flooded at Wassa, and even at Doc Green's place where the old riverbed used to go across the road there, we had it sandbagged and cabled in order to get across there. We were going across a railroad bridge then to get to work from Cranbrook, and so it was water everywhere. That's why we still got these deep ditches in British Columbia, I think. The engineers decided if we dig those ditches deeper, they'll be okay. The runoff will happen. But it did work for the elk. By the first part of January, it was starting to be okay. The big problem was ice, because it would be cold at night. And we had ice right across the whole board there out at Wycliffe. Stephen was when I went to Vancouver onto the fact that it would be going there to Victoria with a dead elk in my truck, he didn't like that much. For some reason, I don't know. And he offered me $10,000, by then it was too late. We didn't have a lot to do, but on that December, when we were refused, I called a meeting in Cranbrook. And we used a hotel that had a big basement in it, and we put out chairs that they would show up. And so December the 15th, I had, when the rain first started, standing room only, undid the chairs, there's 300 people there. And we decided to form the Kootenai Wildlife Heritage Fund. And of course, they elected me as the vice president, and I'm so silly, I keep holding up my hand, I'll do it. Anyway, it happened. And luckily enough, we had a company here, was called Kimmer Forest Resources, and Dan Murphy and a fellow named Murray McMichael were running it. And they came to me and said, if you get a charity number and get your society registered, and we did that with actually Cambites, Bennett, and who's your other partner? Steidel, yeah. And that they were and still are our legal counsel. We had some really good input financially, and it was because we were out there fighting for our big game resource early on. And so we had some good input financially. I worked with Murray and Dan Murphy for almost 10 years, till about 1991, I think. It was 89 probably. Longer than that. That's about how long it was. Well, some years we did $1 million worth of work for wildlife throughout the trench and all areas of the East Kootenay. We did about over time, since I've been involved and all of my directors have been involved, we've done over 32,000 acres of wildlife enhancement work. We've been involved with 28,000 acres of acquisition on some of the critical areas, the good areas. I hate the word critical, but they're important to wildlife it's a habitat thing, but habitat is just this piece of ground with so much food on it that will support X number. And sometimes when there's 20 inches of snow on it, there's no longer habitat. You have to do something different. And we've done that several times. Much to the chagrin of those that are in a responsible position to do that, but I know that my friend Ray DeMarshy, and he is my friend, a really close friend actually, fed during the 1970s to maintain the wildlife populations, mule deer, whitetail sheep, and other species like elk that we all love. And moose. Been lots happening since that particular day, those particular days, and it has to continue to happen. We know how we can get it back. We know what we have to do. We just have to have the will to do it. And it means that some of these ideas about what's happened here have to change, that we have to take a bigger and broader look at things to multiply resources. We have to do some things that every hunter in this room will tell you. When you can kill 22 cougars on the mouth of the Bull River in a period of about 6 weeks that are eating the bighorn sheep there, we got a problem with cats in those winter ranges. So 22 in that period of time. I'm not a cat hunter, but I've been trapped all my life. I've been in all of these valleys, the Wild Horse, the Scoop, Perry Creek. My last involvement with trapping was on the Hawkins Creek, and I had 2 big packs of wolves there that basically cleaned most of the moose. I don't think there's any there left. Out of the Hawkins Creek, in the Stone Creek, sundown, sunrise, drainages. It was no problem back in the day for me to take a moose first morning opening. The moose season then was from September the 10th to the 15th, 5-day season, any bull. And most guys were hunting elk and they never bothered with the moose. It's the best feed we've got here. I want you to know that I know in my heart that everybody in this building has the same feeling for the resource as I do. You might have a better trip than I have, or a better attitude about it than I have. But I know you wouldn't be here today if you didn't love the resource as much as I do. And we have to get it back, and I believe we can. I believe that it's possible, or I wouldn't be standing here. I really thank God that I can stand here today, going on 79 years old, and still have the strength and the will, and my mind hasn't gone yet, to be a part of it. And I plan on being a part of it. When I'm 95, I always said to my wife, I'm going to buy a Honda and put the extended warranty on it. When I was in Vancouver the last time, and Bill knows, they were sitting there talking about finances, which that seems to be all they talk about, and at the Nature Trust Board of Directors, and after about 3 hours, I said this. I'm not going to read it, but what I said was this. I understand, he said, that was another thing I have to introduce. Understand that on the Canary Islands, there's no canaries. And on the Virgin Islands, there's no canaries either. And there's no sheep on Sheep Mountain. That was the first acquisition I was involved with, on the Cuts property. And that property had sheep on it those days. I'm looking for something really important. Can't find it. And that's too bad. Must be here. Our second acquisition, we've got involved in the Elk Valley, and you guys know that story, especially the guys from the Elk. When we fed elk in 1996, this is a good statistic. Popeye Fontana, another old fellow, needed hay to feed a band of bulls that were coming off the top end near the pass, and they just looked like they were starving to death, and they were. And Popeye and his friend, I think Popeye was 71, 72 years old, his friend was a little older, they packed hay up a steep hill every day during the whole winter. We put on the bulletin boards, not only me, there's all kinds of guys here from the Elk Valley that were involved, because I was out brokering hay and putting out flames that were behind me all the time. It was called the BC government at that time that were hurting me and threatened me to go to jail. And I wish they would have, because I could have really raised funds then. We put shifts on the bulletin boards in the 4 mines, I think, that were operating, open cast mines that were operating then. Do you know that not one person had to work a double shift? That should tell every politician how important wildlife is in that area and across the board here. That should tell them that what do you mean they didn't have to work a double shift? They didn't have to, because we were feeding every day. We had small bales so they could handle them, and nobody had to work a shift twice in 90 days. There were guys who did, but they didn't have to. The people signed up. Days off, 4 on, 4 off. They knew exactly where they were. I know there's lots of people here that are close friends of mine that have and do. There's lots of ranchers here that have and do all kinds of things and have forever. It was always my position when we lost the steeples, it was always my position that we should compensate those who lose hay on a basis. It's easy enough to do exclosure blocks, and you can figure out what we could pay them for feeding our wildlife populations on private land. But I won't go into that in deep, because it doesn't matter. My colleagues that are here, we're so blessed today to have the old graybeards here. These guys are scientists. They have no axe to grind. They're all hunters, I might add, but they're not here. They're from across Canada. You're going to be blessed with some of the best information you could possibly hear today. It's so, I spent the last 2 days with them. I can't tell you how important it was to me to just listen to, and it's hard for me to do, just listen to what they had to say and the knowledge that is present with us.